The PowerPoint you're about to watch was prepared for the Nebraska Country School Association Conference held July 19th, 2019 at the Lead Center in Nebraska City. As you watch the PowerPoint, I suggest you imagine you are sitting in the audience that day, learning about the journey of the renovation for this one-room country school, Antelope County District Number 70. It's an amazing story of determination and love for keeping the history of Nebraska schools alive for generations. The final slides have been added to the original PowerPoint to celebrate its completion and share how the school is serving the community. Thank you. I'm Gloria Christiansen, the storyteller. The title of my presentation is Conquering the Impossible, Saving Antelope County District Number 70 One-Room Schoolhouse. The slide presentation chronicles the important or historical events in the order of their occurrence. The slides record in a detailed way the journey of the one-room school project and the challenges we encountered moving the schoolhouse to Neely, Nebraska. Though the building belonged to the past, it has been given new life so it can be useful for generations. Where is Neely, Nebraska? Neely, Nebraska is a small town with a population of about 1,600 people located next to the Elkhorn River in northeast Nebraska. From Norfolk, it is 35 miles northwest. If you were to take a road trip, Neely is about 150 miles from Lincoln, 150 miles from Omaha, 150 miles from Kearney, and 1 hour and 45 minutes from Sioux City, Iowa. Depending on where you live, you can use Major Highway 14, Highway 275, or Highway 20 to find Neely. Neely is only 30 minutes from the famous Ashfall Fossil Bed State Historical Park near Royal, Nebraska. This presentation is my story about my dream of finding a one-room country schoolhouse and turning it into a functioning classroom. As important, I felt the need to capture voices and faces of those who had attended or taught at country schools via interviews. My goal was fueled by my belief that rural schools had played an important role in the development of communities, also in my development as career choices. My dream for an old schoolhouse smoldered for years. I began hanging on to the past by collecting desks, books, furniture, all sorts of memorabilia. Just ask my husband. For nearly 50 years, I've purchased and stockpiled school souvenirs and stored it in several locations, including our 3 garages, the attic, our basement, and the basements of 2 businesses in Neely, where we've lived since 1974. Storage space was bulging. It was apparent we needed to find a schoolhouse sooner than later. By chance, an opportunity for a school emerged in 2013 thanks to a farmer who had lived south of Clearwater. As fate would have it, Jerry Anderson, who owned Moyer's clothing store in Neely and was mayor at the time, was having conversation with Merlin Bowling, who was a county commissioner, when he asked Jerry if she knew of anyone who wanted a schoolhouse he had bought several years ago, and it was sitting on his farm. He needed to get rid of it, and or he was considering burning it. The schoolhouse, District 70, had been there since he bought and moved it shortly after the district closed in school year 1972-73. Jerry mentioned she did know of someone because that person was storing memorabilia in the basement of her business. Jerry contacted me. That day, the dream to find a functional one-room schoolhouse got one step closer to reality. My husband Brian and I contacted the Bowlings and made an appointment to see the schoolhouse. After meeting, Merlin and his wife Janice agreed to donate the building if we could move it off the farm. After first seeing the building, I seriously needed to decide if this was the building I wanted. Maybe I could find one in better condition. In all honesty, to most people, the moss roof building didn't look so good on the outside or the inside, but in my eyes it didn't look too bad either, and I knew it would be a challenge. I was hopeful we could raise money to move and fix it up, and pretty excited about the possibilities. As badly as I wanted to save moss-roofed, yellow-stained structure, the future of the building had to be blessed worth saving by professional builders. After two carpenters inspected the school, both agreed it was worth saving from the burn pile. Both presented bids on renovation. At the same time, bids were sought for moving the building 9 miles to Neely and for moving electrical wires along the rural roads and in town. The total estimated cost to move the structure, renovate the building, and add a basement below the school was around $125,000. Yes, you can see why I titled this slideshow presentation Doing the Impossible. I was overwhelmed with the figure. I remember thinking that divine intervention must surely have to occur if we were to acquire $125,000. But giving up has never been my strong suit, and I'm a believer in spiritual intervention. When I was little and attending catechism class, I was taught the prayer, Glory be. The words to that prayer go like this: Glory be to the Father, to the Son, to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. The words of that short prayer fit well as captions for the next three slides that fast forward the transformation of the schoolhouse's restoration progress from the beginning until its final resting place. As it was in the beginning, the journey started in 2013. It was obvious the schoolhouse needed some work. Well, in truth, lots of work. Though the school was mine, the timing for a campaign drive to raise $125,000 didn't seem right. Call it bad luck, but our city was going through a recall of its leadership in 2014, and it definitely wasn't a time to campaign for donations. Then in 2015, after the recall was resolved, my dad, who lived independently in Neely, developed health problems. My time and attention was needed with him, not on the schoolhouse. He passed July 4th, 2016, at the age of 92. When life slowed down, I was flabbergasted as I looked at past photos of the schoolhouse I had taken on my iPhone and realized 3 years had passed and the school hadn't been moved yet. Thank goodness the Bowling family was patient. It wasn't until 2017 that the campaign began to raise funds for building a basement and moving the schoolhouse to Neely. Not all funds would come from donations. I was in the process of applying for matching grants available through Neely Old Mill District Building and Facade Improvement Program. Eventually, the grants were approved for renovation and fixing up, but the funds couldn't be released until the building was setting in its future home in Neely. We would soon find out if the community was interested in preservation of the schoolhouse. What was accomplished on the schoolhouse from 2017 through 2018 can best be described as a whirlwind of events and accomplishments. The completion deadline dates required by the two grants I had applied for and received pretty much had everyone in a panic mode. As for my husband and I, the schoolhouse project would soon consume our time and energy for 2 years. Is now. Yes, through divine intervention, along with donations, dedicated workers, and determined volunteers, this is what that old schoolhouse looked like in May of 2019. By spring, it was nearing the functional stage for classroom activities. The contractors had met the December 2018 deadline with a little help of an extension due to inclement weather. District 70 ever shall be at home in the Neely Museum complex. It stands proudly with four other buildings: Pearson Wildlife Museum Learning Center, the Pioneer Church, a log cabin, and the Antelope County Historical Society Museum with Harold Ritter's Gallery, which is located across Highway 275. Yes, the schoolhouse was part of the elite complex and is where it ever shall be. The grouping is referred to by many as the Neely Museum Complex. And not too far from this complex, about 2 blocks away, is another museum known as the Neely Flour Mill. On the same day the school was donated to me, the Bolings handed me a cardboard box of historical documents. The box was filled with historical documents they had stored since the district's closing after 1972-73 school year. A historical timeline for the district was included in those original documents dating from the beginning of the district in 1884 through 1949. The primary documents included directors' reports, registers, financial records, inventories, board minutes, classroom schedules, students' names and grades, curriculum guides, and teacher contracts. For the past 3 years, I have read through everything and made notes. The document solidifies what country school was like in Nebraska during that time period. The schoolhouse, with its treasure box of history, must be saved. I gleaned a few historical details from the primary documents to share with you today. Earliest records show that Hattie Pendleton agrees to teach 3 months for $22 per month in 1885. Her contract hangs on the wall at the schoolhouse. When the next term began, Hattie was registered as a 19-year-old student, not the teacher. It was interesting to read Ernest Rice's contract that stated he would be paid $30 per month if there was money in the treasurer after outstanding bills are paid. The first sod school had 3 yards of blackboard. In 1904 program of recitation, the teacher Bertha Rasp had a class called Mother Tongue Language. The school board voted not to pay for the textbooks up until 1908. At that time, the minutes reported the district adopted state rules for using text and agreed to pay for the district's textbooks. In 1914, the complete term register shows that 36 students were enrolled in the district, with two 17-year-old students and one 21-year-old. Each day, the teacher, Florence Bethia from Ewing, started the opening exercise with a Bible reading and prayer. Dismissal was at 4:05. District 70 was also known as Midland. According to the primary records, in June 1915, proceedings of school board meeting stated an election was held for the purpose of voting on a new school building. The vote carried 22 for and 14 against. At that time, the number of school-age children residing in District 70 was 48. This schoolhouse is the building that was restored and is sitting in the Neely Museum complex. More historical facts noted after the new schoolhouse was built in 1916 include the following. On February 5, 1916, public sale of the old schoolhouse was held at 2 p.m. Records indicate that in 1920 through 21, the Antelope County Fair, Boone County Fair, and Teacher Institute was voted as vacation days. Lucille Hemingway, teacher, referenced the Antelope County Fair in her planner as Children's Day, using parentheses to offset the words in her register. The report for annual meeting in June 13, 1932, showed $1,110.04 had been expended for school purposes that year, with $129.69 and $132.13 in hands of defunct banks. District 70 closed after 1972-73 school year. The last country school in Antelope County closed in 2005, 32 years after District 70 closed. And according to my information, the last country school in Nebraska closed in 2012. In the next slides, I would like to reflect on the timeline we successfully completed in order to meet the challenges to restore the schoolhouse to a good state of repair. In other words, to renovate it through donations and grant funds we received. In its lifetime, after the Bolins bought the schoolhouse, the building had been remodeled at some point for a family to live in. So, because of the remodeling, grant officials determined those changes to the structure would make it difficult to preserve it to its original condition. Thus, the project was directed to restore it as close to the original as possible. And that's the challenge we met. First thing on our timeline was to find a network of good team leaders. Jerry Anderson and I became co-chair of the project. Crucial to the team was the support of Antelope County Historical Society. The representatives were Ray Aarons and Laverne Hopman. Other members of the task force included Carol Jason, a retired educator and ESU8 staff developer, and Cindy Hild, who attended a rural school and was a retired educator as well, and the treasurer was my husband Brian, a retired CPA. Other folks from the community volunteered to assist on specific programs and activities, but because of their daily jobs were not available for most meetings. Several remain involved yet today, especially with collecting historical data tied to all Antelope County one-room schoolhouses. That person is Bev Kreutz and Lene Stelling. As a team, we put on our thinking caps and made a to-do list. It was 2017, and the one-room schoolhouse renovation project would be in full swing. The following slides explain how the project unfolded. The team knew we had to get the word out fast and that we needed to be visible. For a while, it seemed we had to be everywhere at once. We needed funds to get the basement foundation poured before winter. Though the original school didn't have a basement, it was decided to include it because of all the memorabilia collected and future intent to house Antelope County memorabilia. That meant we needed enough funds to pay for a basement. Fundraising and awareness activities included designing brochures and putting up displays around businesses, creating Facebook presence, one-room schoolhouse hanging on to the past, building a float in the 4th of July parade, using country school themes to decorate table at Parade of Tables, an event sponsored by our public library. Go around explaining the schoolhouse project at programs for organizations and clubs. Man a booth at Antelope County Fair that included many hands-on activities for children. Sign up people who attended or taught in country school who are willing to be interviewed. The team planned and organized 2 major fundraising events, Dueling Piano, April 28, 2018, and Cow Patty Bingo. One of the key ingredients to the success of the timeline was getting the media on board. Our local newspapers and the Omaha World Herald carried a story. Once articles appeared in these newspapers, Other papers picked up the story as well as a TV station. We also used social media to get the word out about the project. We were grateful for the media's interest in the project, and their articles made a difference as correspondence and donations poured in from outer Nebraska and out of state. In order to reach every household, a 4-page flyer was designed that described the project. It was mailed to all residents in Antelope County and mailed to some outstate addresses. The brochure indicated $125,000 was needed to complete the one-room schoolhouse project. Many donors used the tear-off section of the brochure to send in their donations. An envelope with return address was attached. One more key ingredient was keeping the project's progress visible to the public. A large sign that was placed along Highway 275 marked the spot the schoolhouse would call home. The progress was displayed inch by inch. Timelines, date, deadlines, and challenges. Being in compliance and meeting deadlines were necessary. Following ordinances and getting approval from proper municipality officials was a huge undertaking. Obtaining county commissioners' approval to move building to Neely was priority. Others included finding someone to move the building, hiring a contractor to repair the structure and estimate costs for the project, formulate a renovation plan and construction ideas, build relationships with economic board, city council, and businesses. Apply for 2 grants, Old Mill Facade and Fix the Bones Improvement Grants, recruiting volunteers, and record the daily event by keeping a diary of the journey through note-taking and photos. By late fall of 2017, the schoolhouse project was in full swing and we had the money to start the basement. Finding someone to pour the basement would be remembered as our most difficult task. At the same time the basement was being poured, the mover was contacted to prepare for the schoolhouse to be moved to the complex in Neely. Though we were hopeful it would be moved before the snow fell, it did not happen. Finally, despite a cold 19-degree temperature, the schoolhouse was moving down the country road on its 9-mile trip to Neely at 8:30 a.m. on February 13, 2018. By 3 o'clock, the building jacks were lowered and the building was set onto the basement foundation. Mr. Williams, the mover, was shaking our hand by 4:30 p.m. Jerry and I celebrated its arrival at the museum complex and were much relieved to finally have it in town so the renovation project could begin. The new address for the schoolhouse is 407 L Street, Neely, Nebraska, 68756. From March 2018 until December 2018, the project flourished in order to meet grant completion deadlines of December 2018. The race was on. Once the building arrived at the complex, it was possible to start work on the outside. The covering addition for the entrance to the basement was priority March 14, 2018. Temporary electricity was available in March also. Taking off shingles started on July 18, 2018. The month of October was busy with tasks such as repairing the siding, scraping paint, and painting the exterior by volunteers Gloria Christiansen and Fran Gill. Each side took 2 or 3 coats of paint. Adding an awning to look like the original building we found pictures of in historical books at Neely Museum. Also in October, the gas line to the schoolhouse was connected. An electrical crew worked on outside and inside lights, fixtures, and outlets. The crew dug sewer line on the south side of the building. During the renovation inside, to our surprise, it was found that the wooden 2x6s used in the framing of the structure when it was built in 1915-1916, the walls, the trusses, and joists, had withstood the test of time with ease. Though the plaster crumbled and the glass broke out of the 6 windows, the framing stood without a flaw, an impressive tribute to the carpenters who built it. In May and June, the plaster came tumbling down. The drywall went up the end of October and the beginning of November. The wainscoting and original floor would remain. All the trim from the windows was saved and repurposed. Insulation crew used spray to insulate on October 29, 2018. Hill construction crew made wooden windows to look like the windows that were once there, and all salvageable material was reused. In November, Gloria Christiansen started applying primer paint. Finally, in December, original trim was found and nailed in place. The wainscoting molding was added, as well as coat racks and lunch pail shelves on 12/17/2018. The sink counter was built in the restroom the same day. The floor for the restroom was laid on 12/11/2018. Once the chalkboard and bulletin boards were put up on December 6 and 7, 2018, the classroom seemed to be closer to being ready for students. The sanding of the wainscoting began on 12/12/18, and 2 more coats of paint were applied to the walls. The crew stained and varnished wainscoting. Cherrywood, December 26th through the 28th of 2018. On New Year's Eve Day, December 31st, 2018, damaged floorboards were repaired. The floorwork required more repair than first thought. Once sanded, stained, and refinished, it looked magnificent, thanks to Mr. Rotherham. Once the floor was dry, it was time to furnish the classroom. At last, in April and May of 2019, furniture such as the teacher and student desks were added to the room. This made my husband Brian a happy man. My memorabilia would now have a new home. In the spring, as teachers scheduled field trips to Pearson's Wildlife Museum, Antelope County Historical Museum, and the Old Mill, students were allowed to eat their lunches in the schoolhouse when inclement weather didn't allow them to eat at the park. Students were treated to short activities similar to what they would experience when they visit the one-room schoolhouse for an official day or short trip. The lessons in this school will primarily focus on strategies and curriculum specific to lessons in the 1940s, 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, the time period I attended country school and taught. As far as I know, no one is telling the stories from this period of time. Because the school was built over 100 years ago, comparing the varying concepts of what life was like 70, 100 years ago until the 1980s will help students understand how education in Nebraska has changed. It went from one room, one teacher who taught 8 grades to one teacher for an individual grade level or sometimes combined grades whose teaching instruction was often supplemented with learning centers, units of study, and language experience with visual aids. The goal is to help the students understand what lessons were going on in this classroom 104 years ago up until the 1980s. Probably the main difference of the time portrayed at this schoolhouse is the classroom makeup. The equipment in the classroom will include record players, film strip machines with film strips, audio tapes, 16 millimeter film, encyclopedia, and overhead projectors with transparencies. Dick and Jane readers, weekly readers with blue spelling book will be used in activities. Similar to a heritage school experience, the students will participate in chalkboard activities, penmanship practice. They will bring their lunch boxes and learn the Country school games such as steel stick, stair base, pump pump pull away, red light, green light, drop the hanky, and fox and goose. The day will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, singing a patriotic song such as America, and the hygiene examination. We are hopeful to offer specialized programs for Arbor Day and special holidays that were celebrated back then. If you look closely, you will see the schoolhouse furniture shows the evolution of desks from the 40s through the 1980s. Though we have not had an official opening, visitors started to ask to visit the schoolhouse. During the week in May 2019, the guest book registered tourists from Texas, Omaha, Australia, and Michigan. When visitors walk through the door, they are greeted with the smell of refinished wooden floors. In June, visitors included brand bike rider group and 2 bus tour groups. When it is not a functioning classroom, the schoolhouse is available to visitors during regular Antelope County Historical Museum hours or by appointment. We are proud we have given a building new life and extended its usefulness for generations. Dr. Barb Black, a professor from Wayne State College, read about my plans to move the schoolhouse, make it functional, and to collect stories about rural schools. She was interested in recording history of country schools also, particularly in Antelope County. Dr. Black and her son, Dr. Sam Hurley, a historian and present curator of oral history at the University of South Dakota, had already compiled a list of questions they would use when interviewing. Through collaboration, the three of us set out to interview individuals using a set of questions that had been agreed upon. We set up 90-minute workshops in Elgin, Clearwater, Oakdale, Orchard, and Neely. Dr. Black, Dr. Hurley, and I would lead, guide, and record during the roundtable interactive workshops. Anyone who attended or taught in a one-room country school in Antelope County was welcome, as well as anyone with valuable information or artifacts about any country school. Before every workshop, a consent and release form for adults was completed so the project would have permission to share or release pertinent information collected. In the next slides, you will hear the voices and see faces of some of the people we recorded. Each story is unique. The full interviews are stored electronically at this time on photogools.com and on Passport. The end product using the interviews will be available to the public in the future. It is work without end, amen. In other words, a work in progress. In this slide, you will hear from Ron Saney, who attended District 70 in his youth. He gives a broad overview of what it was like attending grades 1 through 8 in a country school. This segment of the interview focuses on the creativeness he and his classmates experienced during recess time. The workshop was held at the fire station in Clearwater. Christmas programs.
Some of the things at the school. I mean, it was really pretty interesting because there was a pretty good number of kids and one teacher, and as you got older, the older kids did help out, and like Merlin said, graded papers and helped with some of the subjects with the teachers some, but I don't know, the teachers I think must have been pretty efficient, and most of them, when I first started going to school, most of those teachers only went to normal training or whatever it was called. It was over the summer out of high school. They were very young. I mean, a lot of them teachers was 18, 19 years old, maybe even younger. Activities, as Merlin said, it was crazy that games and stuff that you've thought up out there and different things you did. I remember Merlin's brother Jim, he rigged up, remember those sticks we had and put gears on the end of them, and we'd run around out there and we had a crank on them, and the bigger gear you put on, the more they'd plow. And I mean, it just goofy things. I mean, things that you did invent or whatever. I mean, kids were, I mean, they come up with things to play with. I mean, we always, in the wintertime, sledded. We thought it was a monstrous hill. When I go look at it today, it doesn't look all that big. I mean, it's over across the fence in the neighbor's ground. We'd go to that occasionally. Sometimes you had to make sure you ducked when you went under the fence. So, but you know, and just the kids that I wish I could see a lot of them that have left, and some of them how they. One family came to school in a cart, a two-wheeled cart pulled by a horse, and a lot of us kids walked a lot. I mean, in the wintertime, most of the time we were driven to school, but if it was nice at all, you walked. Favorite activities were, I mean, probably one of my favorite subjects probably was either math or, which back then it'd be arithmetic, and probably, I love history. So, the picnics were a big deal. The school picnics were a big deal. A lot of people came to them. And what I liked was when they went to town, they'd go to town after these great big containers of ice cream. And they'd bring them back with, I don't know, the insulated jackets around them, and seemed like everybody ate a lot of ice cream. The other thing that we did, and that got to be kind of a contest that I remember at recess time anyway, was we flew kites a lot. And kids would come up with really some pretty good little inventions in, and then we'd back to the north in this pasture, we'd fly them, and they'd get really high, and then you could tie them, and they'd stay up there. I mean, if things went wrong, of course they'd come down, but they'd stay up there while you was in school, and then you'd go back up the next recess. And
Betty Menning, who had just turned 90 and resided at Evergreen Assisted Living Facility in O'Neill, shared her experiences also. She elaborated on a game they played a lot at recesses that involved using a knife.
Yes, when it got nice, the boys would take a stick with a string and fish in the creek. And I can remember one time they built a little framework and stuck sticks in their fish that they caught and built a little fire. And that was at noon that we did that. But that was fun.
That was wonderful. Someone said that what they found is kids don't get to be creative like they used to be.
Well,
in a country school, they could find a stick and they could make it into something.
Yeah. And you could play games that were, I don't know what the name of the game was, but we always drew a circle with a knife, cut it into how many pieces of the kids that wanted to play, and that was your land. And then you'd throw the knife, and wherever it went, you would slice that off, and that little piece you sliced off belonged to you then. And sometimes there'd be one of them that would own the whole thing by the time it got done, because he knew just how to
hit that knife.
Yeah, and it was I don't know what they called that, but anyway, it was a game that we played a lot.
So, now that was at which school?
That was at this first school.
At the first school?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, how interesting this is.
So,
oh my goodness.
Listening and learning with the legend Laverne Hauptman was delightful. He attended District 72 in Antelope County And he told a story about his teacher being hit between the eyes with a ball while playing softball. It knocked the teacher out cold. A student pointed his finger at the girl that hit the teacher with the ball and shouted, "You killed the teacher." Most all the students started crying. Luckily, the teacher gained consciousness and staggered into the schoolhouse. This story and all stories are worthy of being told and retold for generations. They capture what country schools in Nebraska were like. There are so many more stories that need to be collected. I know saving this schoolhouse was a good thing, especially after rereading correspondence I had received throughout the project. I was reminded how hopeful people were that this project was successful. Many wrote their country school memories down and mailed them to me in hopes of keeping their story alive. Many are displayed in the schoolhouse. Indeed, it is important to keep the voices from the past alive.
Okay, tell me about your experience at District 72.
Well, I started at District 72 when I had not quite turned 5. I made such a fuss that my mother let me go to, and this was into the first grade. We did not have kindergarten at that time, but let me go. And so I was just for the first few days of school. And this was a small, fairly small rural school. When I went there, there was generally about 10 or 12 students. And I had first a very good teacher named Florence Canfield, and my second teacher was Harry Schrader. And then for about 5 years at least, I had a teacher named Mary Butler. And she also was a very good teacher. But I remember particularly we crossed over the intersection and played our ball games in the pasture of the UD farm. And for the bases, we oftentimes used dried cow chips. And I was never an athletic type, and besides, this was when I was down in the grades, a little kid yet, so I was somewhere out in the outfield. And and Mary Butler was the pitcher, and she wore glasses, but she could hurl the ball pretty good. And the she was out there pitching, and a girl named Loretta Guild came up to bat, and she was a poor hitter, and she had a nickname. The kids all called her Lettuce for some reason, but she had a downstroke on her hit on the ball, and her ball was just a little black ball because we'd lost the cover of it, and so there'd be strings hanging out from it, and it was kind of sticky. But anyway, she put across a pretty good one, and Loretta Guile got a perfect hit on it, and it went out and struck Mary Butler right between her, on her glasses, right between her eyes, and just knocked her out cold. And she just lay sprawled out there in the field, and we joined around, and I'm sure there were tears in my eyes, and there were a lot of tears flowing, because somebody said to Loretta Guile, "You've killed the teacher." And we thought she was dead. But then after a while, she shook herself a little bit, and and she could bend her glasses back enough so that she could see through, and she staggered off to the schoolhouse. And after a while, then I don't know that she even rang the bell, but we went in, and she was able to conduct an afternoon of school. But
I would like to end this presentation by reflecting again on the short prayer, Glory Be. If you recall, the words went like this: "As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end." Well, let's change that last phrase to fit my situation. Work without end. Amen. After 6 years from the time the building was donated, Antelope County District 70 Schoolhouse had a new home, but the work continues as we capture more voices and faces through interviews and as we create more products that explain the incredible journey of District 70, as we write the curriculum to be used with students during their classroom experiences, and as we label, sort, and organize donated artifacts and memorabilia. Yes, this project is work without end. Amen. And I love every minute of it. This quote from St. Francis of Assisi gave me courage and helped conquer the impossible. It is written on the chalkboard at the schoolhouse. First, do what is necessary. Then do what is possible. And before long, you will find yourself doing the impossible. Yes, somehow we defeated the impossible. I thank you for your attention and listening to the journey of Antelope County District 70 Schoolhouse Restoration Project. The following slides were added as a way to preserve the historical timeline of events that continued after the preparation of this presentation. Ceremony for the District Number 70 Schoolhouse dedication to the community was held at the Pioneer Church in Neely on September 22, 2019. The program guest speakers included Jerry Anderson, co-chairperson, Boyd Pedersen, Antelope County Historical Museum president, and Charlie Henry speaking on behalf of the county commissioners. The musical entertainment was provided by Roxanne McNally, Carolyn Wyman, Gloria Christiansen, and accompanist Jane Rudebois. A PowerPoint presentation on the history of the renovation project was provided by Gloria Christiansen, co-chairperson. Open house was well attended by the community and several past students who had attended District 70 school. Cookies and water were served in a tent outside the museum on the playground. On November 30th, 2019, Brian and Gloria Christiansen were honored with the Historical Nebraska Heritage Hero Award Medal and Certificate for the work they did on renovation of the Schoolhouse project. The director of the Neely Economic Development Board, Lauren Sheridan Simonson, submitted the Christensen's name. Mayor Joe Hartz introduced Dr. Kim Elder from the Nebraska Historical Society, who presented the award. Brian and Gloria were grateful and accepted it in behalf of all those who had helped in any way make the renovation of the schoolhouse a success. There are many ways to define history, but no matter what definition is accepted, it is important to see that history is the story of people and what has happened to people and families and communities. History is all around us. No matter where we live, it is our story. The newly renovated one-room schoolhouse located in the Antelope County Museum complex hosted 2 lunchbox learning programs that looked back into time about Nebraska and Western history. The programs and curriculum topics were once used in education in rural Nebraska schools during the 1940s through the 1980s. Back then, most of what a student came to understand about the world came from classroom textbooks and stories about what a person heard or what she or he experienced through audio and visual media. The audience discussed and compared differences and similarities between media then and now through questioning. How influential was media in the classroom back then? How much of what we had available is relevant yet today? Do students realize that history comes out of books in carefully defined doses? The lunchbox sessions were held at the one room at no cost. Participants viewed a two-part film strip on the tragedy of the American Indian, Trail of Tears, written by Jerry Klein and produced by Thomas Klein in 1977. The second session, offered on March 11, 2020, was titled Longhorns and Cowpunchers. Both lunchbox activities received good reviews. The sessions will be offered again. The groups in attendance were challenged to think about who gets to write history, whose stories get told, and just as important, whose don't, which memories get distributed and which are forgotten, what is saved and what is lost forever. History is not only facts, it's interpretations. It's written by the people who tell it. These questions were taken from Life in a Jar by Jack Maher.